Starting out life in the arcades like many of the fighters that made their way to the PlayStation, Taito's psychic force was rather unique when compared to the others. Its options and overall style came from left field and helped establish it as something to be celebrated. When it comes to the story, it's all set in the year 2010, with several people starting to develop the ability to wield psychic powers. Now these fighters are what largely set the game apart from its contemporaries, with all of them possessing a specific psychic ability, and as a result, rather than just simply fighting on the ground, the player could go head to head whilst levitating in a cube of psychic energy. Now you can't move outside of the cube, but are allowed to move up, down, left and right within it. This alone added a new twist on the regular formula that many have come to suspect from fighting games. Of course, a huge selection of basic attacks and specials make the cut as well, and with the healthy amount of characters available, it's well worth trying them all to see which one suits your style of play best. When two combatants are in close proximity, you're able to execute devastating moves, such as punch and kick combos, often backing your opponent against the wall of the cube, giving them no place to run. At greater distances, you can rely more on a number of projectile attacks and psychic skills, such as lightning bolts and fireballs to even the odds. The constant flip between these two styles really adds to the overall enjoyment of the combat. It'll keep you on your toes as you progressively work your way through each and every challenge the game throws at you. When it comes to presentation, Psychic Force was quite impressive back in the day. Each of the characters were incredibly unique and soon became one of the main draws of the game for me personally. If you're an avid fan of fighting games and are looking for something new to jump into on your PS1, Psychic Force is a solid choice. Square have always been known for their grand and dramatic RPGs that have continued to define generation after generation, but one of their most enjoyable adventures is a stark contrast to what you'd usually expect from the company. Brave Fencer Musashi is a comedic action RPG that sees the main character Musashi being summoned against his will to an alternate reality in order to save the kingdom of all you can eat. Bit of a strange name to be fair, but like most things the game presents, it's all tongue-in-cheek, which adds immensely to the charm surrounding all of the events that transpire. Now when it comes to gameplay, Musashi feels like a real blender of ideas, from platforming to leveling up and equipping gear, but it never falls on its ass or becomes too bloated as a result. Everything is nailed spot on. You run around as Musashi, getting from objective to objective while hacking and slashing anything in your way. At least that's the bare bones of it. When it comes down to it, however, Brave Fencer Musashi is a much more deeper experience. Battling average monsters is usually straightforward, and Musashi starts out with a sword named Fusion, an apt name considering its main ability besides slicing tomatoes is assimilating an enemy to access a vision of their powers. But the challenge in Brave Fencer Musashi isn't comprised of just a test of skill, it's also a test of wit. A majority of the dungeons and major boss battles are well-designed puzzles. Sometimes you're required to assimilate an enemy to progress, at others you may require a particular element to defeat a boss. The playful and simplistic approach to the visuals has really helped the game stand the test of time. However, it's the environments that really stand out. Each of them are richly coloured and extremely well designed, giving off a defined and vibrant feel that plays hand in hand with the light-hearted nature of the adventure that should be played by every PS1 owner. Coming off the huge success of Tomb Raider, many eyes were on Core to see what they would do next. Nobody expected it would be a game called Swagman that centers around two young twins who collect bugs and can turn into monsters. When they're not in their monster form, they're busy trying to beat down scallywags using their doty weapons of a torch and a yo-yo. In one word, weird. Really weird. One night an entity known as Swagman appears and plunges all of the sleeping people into the world of nightmares. The twins have to escape and locate several fairies that are responsible for allowing people to dream and set them free to bring Swagman's plan to a halting stop. To be fair, for as insane as it all sounds, Core have got to be commended for their originality in pulling it off. Now both of the twins have the amazing skill of being able to push and pull things. The manual explains that this is for small chests. Well, this is a vast underestimation of their strength. These 8-year-olds can move anything, large rocks, heavy metal fences, even a fucking cat. The basic idea is that the twins have to cooperate in order to solve the puzzles and progress. You can swap between them with a single button press. However, the awkward thing is that often the result of the action of one twin cannot be seen on the same screen, and you have to switch to the other one and search around to find what you've actually changed. This adds to the fun, but also the frustration. Although I did not expect much from the game when I started playing, I got drawn in by the oddness of bug collecting, the bizarre locations, and solving increasingly difficult puzzles. After falling more times than I care to mention, and knowing the delights of near death in the abyss, and the roar of the hordes of zombies as they staggered closer and closer to me, I can safely say that although weird and often frustrating, it's still well worth playing. The Grandstream Saga is a fairly basic RPG that seems to carry itself entirely on its gameplay. It doesn't boast the greatest plot or the deepest characters, and is also the infamous you can't see those people's faces problem throughout. Still, no aspect of the game is truly terrible, and the battle system is one of the most original for its time. Walking around is more or less the same as with every other RPG of this era. You buy weapons, armor, and healing items in the shops, and talk to townspeople for some rather vague plot information. You also aren't able to freely wander around the overworld. You've just got a list of available locations for you to select from, which does make the game feel a little linear. You've only got one hero to control, and battles take place in real time. You've got to duck and dive to avoid attacks that are coming your way. You can strike back against your enemies with your stereotypical sword and defend from their attacks by raising your shield. By pressing the attack button several times in succession, you can inflict a combo attack that deals extra damage to your foes. So it's just a case of swerving around and striking when you've got the chance to. But it is still a very involving system. You've also got the option to use magical attacks from a safe distance as well. And like any other good RPG, the Grandstream Saga's got plenty of puzzles for you to solve as well. Although some of them are fairly well designed, they're not too tricky to solve. So don't expect a Lundra caliber brain teasers or anything like that. Visually, the character designs are colourful and bright, and the backgrounds suit the town and dungeon maps, which are both impressive in the way they're laid out. One of the major graphical oddities though is the fact that you can't see the characters' faces during normal gameplay. There's just a blank space where there should be a face. It's not too much of a problem once you get used to it, but what helps steal the show are the anime cutscenes, which drive several of the more important plot elements, with all of them being wonderfully animated to boot. While it's not a brilliant game, the Grandstream Saga is still a respectable RPG that is well worth giving a go. Let's face it, this game was destined to be forgotten thanks to the knob that decided to create what is quite possibly one of the most nonsensical covers ever. Looking more like a cheap Charlie's Angels knockoff than a solid shooter, you'd be forgiven for not even knowing the game existed. As I mentioned, it's a shooter, a deliciously old school take as well. There's not a single polygon to be found, instead in their place are a collection of incredible sprites. To be fair, I can't imagine the Super Nintendo not being able to produce these visuals, although thanks to the PlayStation's extra horsepower, there's never a dropped frame or even a hint of slowdown to speak of. When it comes to gameplay, this is where the game earns its keep. Like most scrolling shooters, the game's insanely difficult, with lots of enemies and projectiles to avoid. Dodging enemy fire is extremely tricky but surprisingly fun, and of course you have your own weapons, which can be upgraded several times with power-ups you collect by blasting enemies. You also have bombs, which clear out large numbers of enemies as well as enemy fire in the area. This particular mechanic comes in handy so often and can usually mean the difference between life and death in some of the more intense moments of the game. Now, to make it fair, you do have a limited number of bombs, but occasionally enemies will leave extra after you've killed them. Right at the beginning, you get to choose from several characters who all possess their own unique weapons and abilities out on the field. From a witch to a stubborn old carpenter, the game is brimming with personality, which really helps it come into its own. Admittedly, the game is quite short and won't last that long. However, in the later levels, using a continue returns you to the beginning of the stage rather than right where you left off, so some challenge does remain regardless if the infinite continues. To spice it up, there's a whopping 7 difficulty settings, but even the easiest can be quite the challenge, due to just one shot from an enemy bringing you down, so don't expect it to be a walk in the park. If you're a fan of shooters, Mobile Light Force is well worth picking up, and with it now having been re-released on the Switch, there's never been a better time to try it out for yourself. Crisis Beat is a beat-em-up that shares many similarities with the likes of Streets of Rage and Double Dragon. It sees you taking up the fight as one of several characters who's tasked with taking down a group of terrorists that have seized a ship and have taken a young girl captive. It's nothing that's gonna rock the boat, pun totally intended, but it provides a backdrop for what Crisis Beat gets so right, and that's the gameplay. As you would expect, each of the characters possesses a series of basic attacks as well as a string of special abilities that makes taking on the hordes of enemies all the more manageable. One standout feature of the game is that nearly everything you see in the levels can be broken. There's nothing more satisfying than hitting an enemy in the front of an object and watching your character perform a special combo to send them flying into it. If there was one gripe with the game though, it would have to be the severe lack of weapon variety. Although in the grand scheme of things it doesn't do much to tarnish the experience, you'll only find yourself coming across a shitty little knife and a machine gun. And while they do offer a different way to deal with the enemies, it would be nice to have a few more options and ways to juggle both your standard attacks and weapon abilities together for even more explosive results. On the graphics front, Crisis Beat is a bit mediocre if I'm being honest. That's not saying that they are awful, but it's clear that the visuals were not the main focus of the developers behind the game. Thankfully, the gameplay more than makes up for it, and with 3 separate difficulty settings to plow through, there's plenty of fun to be had. Although it never quite reaches the heights of the games that have clearly inspired it, Crisis Beat is still a respectable beat-em-up that is totally worth giving a shot. Shadow Madness is a rather old-school RPG that introduced many new features for better or for worse that weren't often seen in other RPGs of the time, such as the ability to skip summon animations, which was a great inclusion, but then there were others like having the option for difficulty levels, which isn't something you usually see in the genre. Now the story of Shadow Madness is about as generic as it gets, but with some unique aspects that help make an impact. The hometowns of the 3 starting characters get destroyed, and some people are catching an illness coined Shadow Madness. You set out with your band of like-minded heroes to try and make sense of what happened. What sets this game apart from any other RPG I've played though isn't the story, but the dialogue. The dialogue is great. It adds a generous amount of personality to each and every character you'll be encountering throughout the adventure that makes them all the more endearing. When it comes to gameplay, the battles are all turn-based in nature with an additional option for movement. Each character has their own specific weapons and skills and can all use magic for both attacking and healing. There are also double physical attacks called twitch attacks, which allow the character to make 2 hits instead of 1, which sounds useful, but the only problem is that sometimes the hits miss, even when the character is at the highest level. The initial magic spells are so powerful that sometimes there's just no need to bother with physical attacks at all. Actually, the animations for these spells are really well done. As I mentioned though, they can be skipped with a simple press of a button, as some of them are quite long. Most battles are easy to win, though when you don't have access to a healer and there are a lot of enemies on screen, it can be quite tough. So the gameplay, although adequate, is not the reason why you should play this game. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the dialogue and world building which really sets it apart, which might seem surprising due to the rather dark and sad themes the game presents. The script and music cast a bright light on the troubled world and help cement Shadow Madness as a game that is easy to recommend despite some of its shortcomings. The PlayStation was no stranger to incredible 3D fighting games. With the likes of Tekken and Bloody Roar, there was plenty for players to sink their teeth into. But one game that often gets overlooked has to be Destroger. Now, as cliche and predictable as the story may be, the same cannot be said for the gameplay. This is where Destroger truly begins to shine. The first thing many players will notice is the unrelenting sense of freedom the game gives you. You're free to run around each of the 3D environments that are all lovingly detailed, with various interactive elements such as props that can be incorporated into the fights that take place. The main bulk of the fighting is done in the form of energy attacks, and there's a total of 3 which can all be mixed together. Each character also has his or her own special ability which can be performed by pressing all of the attack buttons at the same time. Complementing this aspect of the system is close quarters combat that sees you having another 3 different melee attacks to use on your enemy, not to mention a handy dash that will save your ass on several occasions. Now for me, the novelty of running around each environment and blasting away at enemies never got old, but for some, I can clearly see how it could become repetitive and perhaps turn some players away. That's not saying that it's just mindless fun, as there is a surprising amount of depth when it comes to the combat, but it's something worth mentioning nonetheless. When it comes to visuals, it's really important to remember this was released way back in 1998. For its age, it's pretty decent, but the low poly count surely doesn't match the detail scale of, say, Tekken 3 or Soul Edge, for example. If you still play your PS1 like me, or are simply just a fan of fighting games, Destrager is well worth checking out. When it comes to racing games on the PlayStation, there's an absolute abundance of great titles that not only pushed the genre forward, but proved that the console was more than up to the challenge of recreating the world of speed. One that not many people may know about though is a little game known as Racing Lagoon that was brought to us by Square. Unfortunately, it only ever got a release in Japan, which no doubt contributed to its general obscurity amongst gamers. But thankfully, it just recently got a full translation that makes it easier than ever for everyone to enjoy. Now, since the game was developed by Square, it manages to pack in a surprisingly deep narrative that takes place in Yokohama and focuses on the underground world of street racing. You take on the part of Sho Akasaki, who is just starting out his racing career, with the main goal being to learn the identity of a legendary driver known as the fastest legend and his forgotten past. To uncover these secrets, there's two modes offered in the game, one being the high-speed driving RPG that sees you opting to challenge other racers by simply flicking on your lights. By participating in races and successfully winning, you'll be rewarded with points which can then help you progress by acquiring new vehicles as well as parts that can all be fully customized to your liking. There is one major flaw, and that has to be the insane amount of loading you'll have to go through to even just simply play the game. For example, if you get caught in a random encounter, there's about 4 separate screens worth of loading to go through before you even get the chance to put the pedal to the metal. It's not a deal breaker and in no way tarnished my experience with the game, as I'm a pretty patient guy, but for others who may not be, I can see it becoming a huge problem rather quickly. If you're a racing fan, this is a must, regardless of the issues present, as it provides one of the most intricate and well thought out racing games you'll find on the console. At its core, Ronin Blade seems kind of run-of-the-mill. The 2 playable characters are the only ones who can stop an awful plan from being put into action, and as such fight through many missions to achieve that goal. Both warriors are from 2 different cultures and each have their own distinct fighting style. Kotaro the samurai is reuniting with his old childhood friend. Lin the ninja is already engulfed in the plot and seeks more information, but they both get more than they bargained for. The narrative may not be to everyone's taste, but what Ronin Blade excels at is gameplay. Playing as either Kotaro or Lin, you will have an absolute blast slaying the hundreds of zombies and evil samurais that occupy the world. You'll be taking out hundreds of enemies in this game, and the whole time you will love it. So, walking from screen to screen, killing enemies, picking up an item, fighting a boss, starting over is in essence what the game is all about. As either character, you will gain many new weapons and abilities to slay the hordes with, as well as experience as you kill. Also, aside from said special moves, each sword has different combos to pull off. You can do a variety of combinations within the system, so the game doesn't have to be just mash one button and kill everything. Topping it all off is a severe level of difficulty that presents itself throughout the adventure. This isn't a game that's afraid to fuck you off, but it never feels cheap, rather just coming from a misunderstanding of the mechanics or a lack of skill on behalf of the player. A cool feature, however, once you beat the game with a character, you can save and play through again with all of your moves, swords and abilities from the previous game, kind of like a New Game Plus option. Also, there's a few hidden extras that are not so easy to see if you don't know about them, but they are there. Ronin Blade isn't perfect by any means, but I personally believe its shortcomings are outweighed by everything that it gets right. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 4 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and tickle that bell. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos, as well as join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters, Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, NSG Reviews, Quinn, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos and giveaways for as little as $1 per month, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.